to coming as close as you possibly can. Look, good morning everybody. I want to acknowledge I'm on the land of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people and pay respects to First Nations elders past and present, and to acknowledge all the First Nations leaders who have been speaking up for the good of this country. My name is Cassandra Goldie and I'm Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Council of Social Service, and I am joined here this morning from many of our members from the community sector who are on the front line every day of this very serious cost of living crisis, which continues to roll out, affecting people with the least, the worst. I'm also really delighted that we are joined by a number of politicians from across the Parliament. We issued an invitation to every single parliamentarian across the Parliament to join us this morning, to add their voice in support of what is needed first and foremost to tackle the cost of living crisis for people who have the least. The reality is that Australia is a very wealthy country, and yet it is shocking that we continue to have over 3 million people living in poverty, including 1 in 6 children. It is also shocking that we continue to have one of the lowest unemployment payments amongst any of the OECD wealthier countries in the entire world. Job seeker continues to be just $56 per day, and youth allowance is just $47 per day. These payments are grossly inadequate and have been so for far too long. I am a member of the government's Independent Economic Inclusion Advisory Committee, which is a group of deep experts about economic inclusion and policy in Australia. It is chaired by Jenny Macklin. That committee has recommended repeatedly that the first priority must be to fix the adequacy of our unemployment payment. I don't want you to underestimate the number of people that you meet every day who are desperately trying to pull it together, relying often on income support. You must remember this Parliament last year passed and delivered $20 billion in tax cuts, a lot of which went to some of the highest income people in this country. So I'm sure there will be questions about, can we afford to do this? And my clear message to you today is we cannot afford not to do this now. We have 2 weeks left of this Parliament, and we are again urging every parliamentarian to bring forward the legislation that is needed to fix the adequacy of job seeker. And if that is not delivered in this Parliament, we are going to call upon every politician that campaigns in their electorates to speak up for people with the least in this country, and if there is a debate about who is to form the next government, to ensure that fixing the adequacy of job seeker is the first order of business in the first sittings of the next Parliament. I'm delighted to see the level of support. I want to thank all of the journalists who have continued to cover this story, to lift up the voices and experiences of people who really are struggling in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. I'll hand over to Trinity. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Trinity Ford and I'm the President of People with Disability Australia. PWDA supports the call to raise the rate because Australia's income support system is failing people with disability. We are disproportionately affected by the rising cost of living, and we face systemic barriers to accessible housing, employment and education. Job seeker, youth allowance and related payments are simply not enough to cover the basics like food, rent, healthcare and transport, let alone the additional costs for medicine and treatment and support. Nobody should have to choose between purchasing medication, eating a meal, or having to stay in a hospital or unsuitable accommodation because these payments are too low. Lifting income support rates is the right thing to do, and it's an important way to lift people with disability out of poverty and ensure that we can live independently and fully participate in our society. Thank you.
Good morning everyone, my name's Elizabeth Devaney. I'm the Chief Executive of Consumers Health Forum of Australia. We're the national peak body that advocates to this Parliament for better healthcare for every Australian across public and private healthcare. So with the cost of living crisis that we're experiencing now, what we increasingly hear from everyday Australians, from our member organisations, are stories like, I'm taking my medicine every second day because I can't actually afford to pay for enough of it. Or recently spoke to someone who was selling their clothes on eBay so they could afford their doctor's appointments. People who are making decisions to pay their rent or for their kids to go on a school excursion over getting their own healthcare needs met. And we've actually surveyed Australians and asked them about raise the rate, and we have had overwhelming support from the community to raise the rate. People understand and say to us in their free text answers to our surveys that financial insecurity and financial disadvantage impacts on your health. Of course it does. If you can't pay your bills, how are you going to feel relaxed? And if you can't keep yourself well, how are you going to have a good life? And as Cass said, in a wealthy and lucky country, that shouldn't be the reality of 3 million Australians. So CHF, our member organisations and the community really support increasing the rate for income support. The rate needs to be raised, and we call on this Parliament to do that as soon as possible. Thanks.
Dane Moores from Settlement Services International. SSI is a human services NGO that supports around 60,000 people each year, most of whom are refugees, migrants, and people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. When income supports payments are as low as they are today, they trap people in poverty. They make it incredibly hard to find a stable job, to find safe housing, to put a healthy meal on the table for your family. And these challenges are even greater for people from refugee and migrant backgrounds who face additional obstacles and barriers. It's time to create a proper safety net to support people doing it tough in Australia. This isn't just an economic issue, this is an issue about dignity, it's about fairness, it's about opportunity. It's about creating a proper safety net so those who fall in hard times can get through it and come through the other end. Australians deserve that dignity, they deserve to be given a fair go, and that's why we're calling for the rate to be raised.
Patricia O'Donovan from Playgroup Australia. We're a national organisation with state-based organisations that deliver playgroups for families that are place-based and emerge because of community need. Over 35,000 people attend a playgroup every week. Our playgroups are now a lifeline for families facing financial pressures. They provide safe, inclusive spaces for children to play and parents to connect at little or no cost. Increasingly, families are seeking these sorts of places to come to with their children. They are also becoming places to share resources due to the ongoing financial pressures caused by cost of living, and we must take immediate action to lift income support and ease these pressures on families for those who need it most.
Good morning, my name is Dr. Eleanor Jeffries. I'm a sex worker and I'm here speaking on behalf of Scarlet Alliance, the Australian Sex Workers Association. We're a national peak body and our membership includes the sex worker organisations who do frontline crisis support across all the states and territories of so-called Australia. For our members, being part of ACOSS is extremely important because we are standing alongside other communities who know what it's like to do it tough, who know what it's like to live day to day financially and would not wish that stress or mental strain upon anyone. When you are the one thing between your children and getting food on the table for your children, that is a burden on a lot of families in Australia and there's nothing about the welfare system that is up to par to relieve people's needs and to actually support vulnerable people in need. As the cost of living has gone up and as food on the shelf has increased and welfare support payments in Australia have not, it is hard not to think that we are in a socially designed, deliberate economic crisis affecting just one layer of people in the community. It is not fair, it's not dignified, and it feels to many of our members that people who are unemployed or underemployed are being punished by the welfare system and relegated to insecure housing and living hand to mouth. Scarlet Alliance, the Australian Sex Workers Association, supports the push by ACOSS to raise the rate, and we'll be standing alongside all the other community groups and the crossbench politicians until it's done. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Oh, sorry. Australia is a pretty wealthy country, and we can afford to let people live in dignity. If we reallocated 1% of our federal budget, about $6 billion, we could pull 1 million people out of poverty by increasing the job seeker rate. What an incredible opportunity we have at the moment to change the lives of 1 million people. And the evidence shows that this will not create disincentives to work. It just will stop people from being trapped in poverty. And this is a great economic decision. This is supported by the Business Council of Australia, by the Committee for Economic Development of Australia, and by a majority of Australians. And it's not only a great economic decision, it also goes to who we are. We are a country where we think people deserve a fair go, and this is the opportunity to give people a fair go. So I implore both sides of politics to take a bold decision when people are really suffering on cost of living and give people back their dignity, give 1 million people back their dignity.
So I want you all to stop for a minute and just think. $56 a day in your pocket or bank account, $47 a day for youth allowance. And now think, how do you meet the needs when it comes to rent, energy prices, probably communications, clothing, food, transport? How do you make that meet all the things it needs to cover? It is simply impossible. And number one responsibility of government and all elected representatives must be to ensure the safety of their communities, of residents, of citizens. And that must be being able to meet those very basic needs. We must support people to make sure they are able to participate in our society and in our community, find work, get the health care, get their children to school. All these things are very basic needs in a developed society. We hear a lot in this place from the Prime Minister and the opposition leader. Now, being a strong Australia, contrary to what many say, is not about hitting down. It is not about locking people up. It is not about talking tough. It is actually about having a safe society and supported society to ensure people can live their best lives and participate to the fullest of their ability. Now, the government, whilst in opposition in the previous term, made lots of promises, talked big on doing something about lifting job seeker, youth allowance, supporting the most vulnerable in our community. And yet, in this term of government, other than ordinary CPI increases, it has been less than $3 a day, the increase by the Albanese government to the most vulnerable in our communities. I know how hard it is. Before Christmas, I attended with my team charity organisations that are packing meals, that are doing youth support boxes for so many in need. Our charities in our communities have never seen so much need and demand for basic support, food, toiletries. These things should be able to be afforded on this support. So to the government, for all those promises whilst in opposition, as you now go into an election period, the support has been less than $3 a day increase during this term of government. That is pathetic and disgusting. And so now is the time to come true to all those promises and words and deliver an increase to youth allowance and job seeker that brings all of our communities to a meaningful level of support. They're currently on half the amount of what the pension is. That is simply disgusting. It has to be done.
We have talked and talked and talked about raising the rate for years. And while politicians have talked, people have gone hungry, they have lost their homes, they have fallen ill, and some have died. If the measure of a society is how well it looks after people who are most in need, Australia is failing miserably. And what makes this more egregious is that the government has had the capacity to get it done. That is evidenced by the crossbenchers and the Greens who are here today supporting raising the rate. The Labor government and the coalition don't bat an eyelid at spending billions of dollars on nuclear subs. But the minute we talk about raising the rate to lift people out of insecurity, homelessness and poverty, all of a sudden we're fiscally responsible. That is not good enough. Poverty is a policy choice, and we need to end poverty already, and we need to raise the rate.
Well, thank you to ACOSS and to all of the groups that are here today to bring our attention back to the most vulnerable Australians that we, quite frankly, are failing. I've lost count of how many press conferences I've come to stand in support of raising the rate, and still we see no action. We saw a raising of the rate for a brief period during COVID, and we saw what an extraordinary difference it made to those people who were receiving it. And then, in the ultimate act of cruelty, it was withdrawn. We need to raise the rate. We are having a conversation on every page of every major newspaper about a housing crisis, about a cost of living crisis. We've seen rents go up in areas across the nation of up to 30% or indeed higher. It's impossible to find affordable accommodation if you are on this level of payment. Less than $60 a day. How can you possibly pay rent, power, food bills? How can any little child step into the schoolyard with an equal chance of succeeding with peers who have a safe and secure home and a good income? This is our opportunity to lift people up, to enable Australians who need help the most, but more than that, they don't want to be receiving help. They want to participate fully in our economy and in our nation and fulfil the many, many talents that they have to contribute to this nation. I stand here yet again imploring our government to get serious about the cost of living crisis for people who are absolutely dependent right now on these payments. It's simply untenable that any Australian government can ignore this call to raise the rate, and I implore them to do it. They've got the power to do it. Get on and do it now.
I want to thank Cass Goldie, ACOSS and the many other organisations that have tirelessly advocated for people who desperately need more support from all of us. So many Australians across the country are doing it tough. People who have full-time work are doing it tough. Those on job seeker and youth allowance are living in poverty. And yet as a country, we decide that that's okay, that we're going to leave our fellow Australians behind. And I don't want to hear another word from the major parties about how we can't afford this when they are so gutless that they won't even stand up to multinational gas companies that are taking us for a ride. We're happy to give away our resources like gas, and at the same time turn and say to our fellow Australian, sorry, can't help you, mate. It's not good enough and it needs to change.
My name is Terry Slevin. I'm Chief Executive Officer of the Public Health Association. I want to celebrate democracy. And a way of doing that is asking everyone who seeks to form government in the next term in this House to give us a number. How much will they commit? to payments for the people who are doing it the toughest. We want a number. We don't want vagaries. We don't want general impressions. We don't want we'll decide that when we're in government. We want to know how much the people doing it the toughest are going to be supported by the next Australian government. Ask that question of every candidate in this election.
Happy to take questions, everybody, of anybody who's here.
Speak up a bit, sorry.
Sorry, with the election coming up and the likelihood of that election being on Parliament, what more do you think you can do as independent entities to pressure either major party to sort of committing more funding for the
I'm happy to. A key focus for me going into this election and my commitment to my community is to work hard in ensuring the safety of the most vulnerable in our community and to ensure that they are supported. That means whoever wishes to form government, if I have the honour of being returned to this place to represent the Warringah community, for me it will be a priority that fiscal responsibility and priorities are in place by whoever wants to form government. And that means meeting those basic needs before we provide diesel fuel subsidies to mining companies and give away resources as Senator Pocock described. There are many areas, there are many choices a government makes. It decides where it spends the money. Currently, we have before the Senate a piece of legislation that I have nicknamed Payday for Political Parties. The Coalition and Labor are proposing to change donation reform and to ensure the public purse will increase the amount it pays to political parties by a substantial amount. In fact, more than what minimum payments have gone in this term of Parliament to job seeker or youth allowance. So think about that for a minute. They have not hesitated to come together to do a dirty deal to pay themselves more money, but they quibble around the cost of bringing the most vulnerable in our community up above the poverty line. So my priority in the event of a minority government will be to require responsible prioritisation of where spending needs to go.
The last time we had a minority government, the Greens got dental into Medicare for kids, and we also got world-leading climate legislation. If we are headed to minority parliament, which all the polls tell us we are, the Greens will put on the table those things that are in our platform that we know will help the community, and raising the rate is certainly one of those things that we will be taking strongly to this election.
There's no guarantee about who will be re-elected to this place, but if I have the privilege of representing the people of Indi, the voice from my electorate is very clear. We need to raise the rate. In a minority government situation, and again, we don't know if that will be the case, but if it is, there is an opportunity with multiple pieces of negotiation happening on multiple pieces of legislation. It's not just a one-off. There are many opportunities in a minority government to make a difference, to push whoever is in power to finally bring people out of poverty. It will be one of my priorities if I'm re-elected to this place to continue to work on this issue. So I think minority government is in fact an opportunity for Australia to see justice when it comes to the support of our most vulnerable Australians. We know Australia wants this, and I think that you see a coalition of people behind you who truly believe in this, and it's an opportunity that I think none of us would let slip through our fingers, to work hard, to negotiate hard, and to get the kind of outcomes that will finally see justice when it comes to raising the rate.
I'd just like to add, my job, as is the job of every representative in the Parliament, is to represent the values of my community. And when I have community events and I ask, what sort of country do you want to live in? Fair is one of the words that always comes out. So in the event of a minority government, I would be speaking to both sides if I'm re-elected, and looking at who actually will represent the values of my electorate the most, and bringing 1 million people back to a life of dignity by pulling them out of poverty, I think is pretty fundamental to living in a fair country. So that's one of the things I'd be looking at.
Any questions?
Yeah, just do you have any confidence or have you had any indication that you'll get to have a meeting with anyone from the Albanese government or coalition this week to put forward your priorities?
I can assure you that we are meeting wherever we possibly can, and that this is the top agenda when we meet with the politicians from all sides of politics. And in the meetings that I have had in the last few weeks, I have made it very clear to every politician, do not underestimate the mood in the Australian community right now. You cannot take people's vote for granted. Do not underestimate that when you are talking to somebody and preaching at them about the dignity of paid work, in the meantime they know that they are going without food because you have not done your job. There is a real question about who do you trust. I'm here this morning with representatives from across the community sector who have one of the highest levels of trust amongst the Australian community. And so we are bringing to the message of every politician that if you want to build trust in the Australian community, you need to commit to fix the adequacy of our income support system. Don't underestimate how many people actually rely upon it in any given year. And the reality is that we've had a recent experience in Australia which has demonstrated how easy it is to end poverty in a wealthy country. Literally, the politicians in this parliament had the power in this term, you can see it with the crossbench, to deliver the adequate increase to job seeker and youth allowance, which all the experts and people in the community have said is the most important thing we can do to help to end poverty in a wealthy country, and it has not been done. It has not been done. There was a modest increase, but it was nowhere near enough, and everybody knew it. And so we should have a parliament which is not debating, tax breaks for long lunches. We should be a parliament that is coming together over the issues that really matter for people in the community, because they are all watching. They are all watching what people promise to do, and I want to thank every politician who has come here this morning to again commit that they will do all they can if they're re-elected to fix the rate of job seeker and youth allowance or unemployment payment. And I urge every politician to listen, and to listen deeply to the mood in the Australian community right now, because they're all watching. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks.